The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Welcome to today's long-range planning for day use visitor access strategy at Rocky Mountain National Park. For today, here's our agenda. I'll start with some webinar and meeting logistics. We'll have some opening remarks by the park superintendent. We'll have a staff presentation going over key issues, desired conditions, and conceptual management strategies. And then we'll have a question and answer session at the end. And as you can see on the screen, there is a live captioning available if you do need it. And I put the link to that in the chat box on your GoToWebinar control panel. Just a few quick tips on how to use the control panel for submitting questions. All attendees are in listen-only mode right now. At any time you have a question, please type it in during the webinar or after the webinar into the questions box at the bottom of the control panel where the green arrow is pointing to, and then hit the send button, and we'll go right to staff and we'll start collecting those questions. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have a verbal answering of the questions at the end as time allows. We're slated to go till 3:30 Mountain Time today. So let's go. So if you want to provide a formal comment on the project, visit the park's Pepsi site. The link is right there at the top at the first bullet, parkplanning.nps.gov. I will chat that link out so you can click and go right to it. The public comment period is open as of May 21st, so it's open right now, and the period closes on July 19th, 2021. So even if you submit a question or a comment today, that's great for our conversation today. But if you want to leave a permanent comment on the project, please do so during Pepsi, on the Pepsi site. And so I want to turn it over to Superintendent Darla.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for being with us here today. I am Darla Seidels, and I am Superintendent of Rocky Mountain National Park. We really appreciate y'all taking time out of your busy lives to join us today to learn about what is the kickoff of this long-term visitor use management plan. We're looking forward to your questions, as Doug mentioned, as part of this webinar, as well as, very importantly, your written comments to the Pepsi system. And before we get into the presentation, I want to just take a few minutes to clarify the topic that we are focusing on and discussing today, and that is the long-range visitor use management plan. So this plan, or today's webinar, is not about the various visitor use management pilots that we've conducted over the last 5 years. We've done a number of things since 2016, which include restricting access when parking lots filled and congestion warranted. And we've done a couple of other things. Last year, we started the timed entry system. We learned some lessons from that, and we're using that information to do a different timed entry system this summer. But today's session is not about those interim trials. All of those things that we've done up through now is really short-term kind of stopgap measures that give us the opportunity to try some different approaches to managing our ever-increasing visitation. And it gives us a chance to see what might work in this long-term plan. So again, today's focus is the long-term plan. Today's meeting, we had two last week that kicked off this initiative, and this is probably going to be a 2-year project in process. It's not a simple thing, and there are a couple of opportunities for the public to provide input. So it's really important. We do value your input. We do want to hear from you. What do you value about the park, and what ideas or management concepts do you have that maybe you're not going to hear today? We don't claim to have all the answers, and that's why we're doing this webinar, to get your input. And you'll continue to have input throughout this long-range plan. So for today, during this webinar today, we want to be clear about what the purpose of this long-term day use visitor access strategy is. We want to talk about what are the key issues that the park is facing with regard to visitor use management. Why are we even doing this at all? We want to talk about what the desired conditions are across the park, from a front country experience to a remote wilderness experience. And then we want to talk about some potential and, again, conceptual possibilities for a long-term future management strategies. So we want to hear your questions. We want to be able to answer them, as many as we can take today. We want you to know how to submit your formal comments to Pepsi, and we will want to let you know about what are the next steps after this. So let's go to slide 2, my slide 2. So let's take a minute here to introduce the folks that are participating from both the Rockies staff as well as our regional and Washington staff here today. So you've already heard from Doug Wetmore. He's the project manager, the project manager for the Environmental Quality Division in Denver. I'm Darla Seidels, superintendent. I'll be shortly turning this over to John Hannon. He is our visitor use management planner for the park. Kyle Patterson, she'll be helping to coordinate and answer many of the questions at the end. She is our public affairs officer. Sherry Yost is working behind the scenes. She's our chief of park planning. And then also from our Denver Service Center, and the Denver Service Center serves the entire National Park Service. So just to be clear about Carrie's role, but Carrie Cahill is the branch chief for the Visitor Use Management Group, and she's also the chair of the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council. So that's who you have on tap here today talking with you. And let's go to the next slide. Before we can really get too much involved in where we want to go, we need to know what our mission is. And so you see the mission listed there. I want to just highlight some key words for you. You'll see conserve resources, enjoyment, unimpaired for future generations. So clearly we have a very challenging mission. It's quite the balancing act to ensure that our resources are protected. And, you know, honestly, this is not 1970 or 1990 Colorado anymore, unfortunately. So it is incumbent on us as managers to manage the park, and we need to take into account what is the reality of where we are today with the growth of not only the state's population, but of our visitors. We really, need to ensure that we're taking care of our resources and that these parks, such as Rocky, are available not just for us and not for our kids, but for our kids' kids. So let's go to slide 4, talk a little bit about the purpose and planning. And so, again, our purpose here is to ensure that we're providing visitor access in a way that helps to protect the fundamental resources and values of the park, the natural and cultural resources of the park that made this place so important that it was deemed a national park. So we want to ensure that the resources are protected. So we want to identify strategies that address those 4 bullets that you see at the bottom there. Again, the park natural and cultural resources. What is the staff and visitor safety aspect of this? A number of years ago, before we started the restrictions in our most highly visited areas, people were getting into fist fights. They were getting mad at each other. We had a whole group of staff that actually quit because of the conflicts between visitors about getting parking spaces and having the opportunity to be in the park. So obviously safety is a key element of what we look to for our future scenario. The visitor experience, obviously that is, one of the 2 main tenets of our mission again, and we want to be able to provide great experiences for the public. And, that will vary from person to person on what a great experience looks like. And we understand that. And then again, the park operational capacity. That has to do with staffing levels, budget, our infrastructure, our capacity to be able to serve visitors, and what is appropriate in a park that is 95% wilderness. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next one. You'll see here a graph with our visitation and a very sharp spike in visitation from about 2013, which was right after the floods. We had about a 44% increase in visitation, and as of 2019, we had 4.6 million visitors. That was at the time, the third most visited national park in the country. Let's go to the next slide. A few more stats about our visitation. 2019, before COVID, of course, was certainly a high record for us. And we had 4.6 million people. As I said, we were the third most visited park in the country. As you can see, you know, a lot of that visitation is right in the primo months of the summer. June through September, we had 3.2 million visitors in just that very short time period. And so another really interesting thing that happened last year, you know, even with COVID, the park was closed for 2 full months. We had, you know, we initiated the timed entry reservation system, and then we had over 100 days of wildfires. Even with all of those things happening, we were still the 4th most visited national park in the country. So that gives you some kind of indication that, you know, this is not going to end anytime soon, that people are going to continue to come to the park. And so that is why we are here before you today, to talk about how do we manage that visitation and ensure our resources are protected. And so with that, I believe I will turn it over to Carrie Cahill. And again, she is, for the entire National Park Service, the chair of the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council. Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks, Darla. I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about the council and our guidance that we're using to guide our planning, decision-making, and management for visitor use. These are best practices have been synthesized by the Interagency Visitor Use Management Council. The council was formed in 2011, so we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year, and it includes 6 federal agencies that all provide visitor use and manage for recreation opportunities. And the intent of the council is to provide a common language and shared knowledge of management techniques, as while efficiently sharing tools, training, technical assistance, and best practices. The circle graphic on this side illustrates at a pretty high level the visitor use management framework. This is a process designed for federal managers to collaboratively develop, implement, and monitor strategies and actions to maximize opportunities for visitors to connect with their public lands and waters. The intent and ultimate desired outcome of applying this framework in Rocky's current ongoing planning process is to provide high quality visitor experiences while protecting the natural and cultural resources of the park. This framework and other related guidance from the Interagency Council is in use across the National Park Service, and the learning from those efforts and this work at Rocky Mountain National Park are being shared, which has really led to more innovation, lessons learned, as well as consistency across the National Park Service. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Great, good afternoon, everybody. So before we jump into kind of all the issues and the desired conditions, and wanted to just take a moment and kind of acknowledge all the work and research that's been done at the park over the years related to visitor use and recreation, and also the impacts of those on the park's resources. This graphic on here, this is just kind of a timeline that shows projects and broken down into some broad categories there. But you can see that really in earnest research work related to visitor use started actually in the late 50s and early 60s, with one of the first studies looking at the impacts of recreation and use in the alpine tundra, which of course the alpine tundra is one of the key natural features of Rocky Mountain National Park. And as you see through the years, there's been a whole variety of studies and work done related to these issues. In fact, this year we have a couple of other ongoing studies related to visitor use that'll be taking place this summer as well. Let's go to the next slide. So we'll start off with the key issues, and we're going to talk about a variety of issues that are facing the park. And we're presenting these, and these were developed from not only park staff, but comments from visitors that we've received over the year, as well as that research, body of research that I showed you as well. And this is one of the elements where we want you to be involved and make comments. Do you agree? Are these the key issues facing the park? Are there others? Are there something that we missed? So as we go through these, kind of keep that in mind to think if there's something that we might have missed that you feel is important that we're not taking into account. So one of the first issues that we're going to cover is visitor-created trails and trail widening throughout the park. Again, these are also sometimes called social trails. You'll hear that term as well, interchanged with visitor-created trails. These are the formation of trails or the expansion or widening of existing designated trails in the park. Now, certainly these trails have an impact on not only the cultural and the natural resources of the park, but also can be kind of a hazard at times with people trying to navigate the trail system in the park, where there's shortcuts, unofficial trails. People can get off designated routes quite easily and get lost, so it impacts their wayfinding here. Let's go to the next slide, and we're going to just take a quick look here at some other pictures here. The picture that you see on the left and then also in the middle there, this is the Marmot Point area off of Old Fall River Road. It looks like a designated trail in this photo, but it's actually a visitor-created trail in the tundra area. And you can see by the photo in the middle there, at the bottom of the trail, it's over 5 feet wide. In fact, we've had vehicles pull off Old Fall River Road and drive up part of the way up the trail, thinking it was just an extension of the dirt road. The photo on the right there, that is the Deer Mountain Trail head area. That's right around Deer Ridge Junction, if you're familiar with that area of the park. Because the parking is spread out over the two roads at the intersection there, basically it's just a spiderweb of trails, which should be just one particular trailhead. And the trail gets very wide, and there's a lot of resource impact in that area, that trailhead. So let's continue to the next slide. We're going to talk about human waste next, but this happens to be a study that was done in the Lockvale area. And before I dive into that, I did want to mention, speaking of visitor-created trails, in the Lockvale area alone, there's 8 miles of designated trail, but the park over the last several years has been working very hard to map our visitor-created trails. And we've actually mapped 25.5 miles of visitor-created trails just in the Lockvale area alone. So if you think and you multiply that number out throughout the park, there's a lot of trails that have been created over the years and a lot of impact. So now we're going to dive into human waste. There is actually a lot of human waste that is found just off the trail in the park. Last year, we had some researchers take a close look, just isolated in the Lockvale area. The photo on the right is a map. The poop emojis represent all the areas where they found human waste just off the trail. Again, it's kind of self-explanatory, but human waste certainly impacts the soil quality, the visitor experience for sure, and also the water quality. And if you think about it, the Lockvale area, that drainage drains into Glacier Creek and eventually ends up in the town of Estes Park's water supply. So if you think about that, and this is just one small area of the park, there's many areas of the park that are suffering from high impacts of human waste throughout the park as well. Let's go to the next slide. So the next couple of issues here kind of center around the number of vehicles and vehicle-related issues that we have in the park. You can see the photo on the right. That's a photo of the Alpine Visitor Center, and quite a big queue trying to get in there as well. What we find during typical visitation is there's a big push of people and visitors and vehicles that enter between 10 and 3. And so in those time frames in the park, We find that, there's a significant roadway, parking lot congestion. Those all cause direct impacts to park resources. There's a lot of illegal roadside parking that happens at those times. The desperation that visitors sometimes feel trying to find a parking spot, trying to visit their primary destination within the park and not being able to find parking leads to a lot of that roadside parking. Certainly contributes to air quality issues with the amount of vehicles circling parking lots and run, trying to find a space. Again, in the second bullet there, all this traffic does have an impact on the visitor experience, certainly in people being able to access their primary destination, having to settle to go somewhere else because they can't find parking or access to that destination. Certainly a lot of congestion around parking lots, lines at entrance stations, and a lot of queuing at the shuttle stops as well. Let's go to the next slide. Also, speaking of vehicles, more impacts from vehicles and visitor numbers in the park. You can see here in the photo, there's a lot of impact to wildlife in the park, and wildlife movement, migration, and breeding are impacted at times by this heavy volume of traffic and visitors. Let's go to the next slide here, and we can see some other impacts of visitors and wildlife. Of course, the opportunity to take a selfie or a photo with wildlife. Folks are getting dangerously close to these elk in these photos. If you look at the picture in the right, I like this picture because it's not only displaying that, she's way, way too close to that elk, but you can see the traffic in the corner of the photo there is backed up because of it as well. So lots of impacts related to, visitors interacting with wildlife. Let's go to the next slide. So also, these high visitation numbers can result in a lot of conflicts in the park, not only between visitors, but between visitors and staff, and then also the different types of uses that are occurring in the park. We have examples over the years of people's experiences being impacted. Folks trying to fish, getting impacted by other fishermen, trying to crowd out in spaces. Certainly in hiking, there's a lot of impacts and people congregated tightly in different areas. This has led, unfortunately, to sometimes bringing that level of frustration up in visitors, and we've had a kind of an increase in hostile interactions between visitors with other visitors, and also between visitors and park staff throughout the years as well. And so, that's not a good trajectory to be on. And then, of course, certainly all this activity, Darla mentioned it at the beginning, and we'll cover it a little more, but Rocky is 95% designated wilderness, and with that, there's some certain wilderness characteristics and values, and those are being impacted by the vast numbers of people that we see at times in the park. Let's go to the next slide. So the other thing that's happening due to the high visitation in the park is we're seeing a lot of excessive wear and tear on our facilities. Rocky is a different and a difficult environment to be a building in anyway, and then compound that with high visitation. The life cycle of some of our facilities, and also, the scheduled maintenance that we expect to do on these places, that kind of time frame is accelerated due to the high use that we see. Especially centered around a lot of our restrooms, see excessive use. Not only leads to, everything from, more frequent painting, lots of broken door hinges. The other impacts that, maybe are not so visible to the public are high water use that we have associated with our restrooms, and certainly high wastewater generation that our infrastructure struggles to keep up with. Let's go to the next slide. Again, with the higher visitation comes high traffic volumes. And these traffic volumes impede our ability as park staff to provide the services that the public wants. Prime example of that is we used to offer a lot of ranger-led interpretive programs in the Bear Lake Road corridor, and we had to stop doing that for the main reason being that, visitors that wanted to see those programs or participate couldn't find parking, and our rangers that were going to do those programs had trouble finding parking and access to the corridor. Again, these park functions, it's across the board. It impedes our ability to do, daily maintenance, custodial services, provide shuttle service in a, timely fashion, fluid fashion on a lot of our shuttle routes. And also another key one is it impedes our ability to respond to emergencies. You can imagine if you look at that picture down there on the right, trying to get an ambulance through there to respond to emergency would be challenging at best. Let's move on to the next slide. Again, another kind of impact that we have seen, unfortunately, increasing over the past several years with that higher visitation. We've seen increased illegal campfires happening in the park. For those of you that are familiar with the park and have been in the area for some time, the Fern Lake fire in 2013 was the result of an illegal campfire. We've responded to many campfires. Fortunately, most of them we've been able to address early on before they have gotten to any size of concern. 2015 seemed to be a banner year where we had a sharp increase in illegal campfires in the park. So, not only a concern for the park, but certainly a big concern for local communities. That point was not only exemplified in 2013 during the Fern Lake fire, but also last year when we saw very increased and very active fire in many areas of the park, that ended up in evacuations on the Grand Lake side and also on the Estes Park side as well. Let's move on to the next slide. So moving away from key issues, we're going to talk a little bit about desired conditions. Now, here's the definition from the Interagency Visitor Use Framework that Carrie spoke about. You can see it there. So what a desired condition is, it's a statement of aspiration that describes a resource condition, a visitor experience or opportunities, or facilities or services for a particular area. So it's important to keep in mind that, desired conditions might not be the present condition, but it's the condition that we want an area to get to. Rocky is kind of a unique park where, like we've already mentioned, 95% of the park is designated wilderness. So the Wilderness Act actually provides our first set of desired conditions for the park. The Wilderness Act lists out several wilderness characteristics that you find in a wilderness area. Some of them are listed here, pristine natural conditions, the opportunity for solitude, the opportunity for self-reliance, untrammeled conditions. So Rocky already, with that designation, we already have kind of, a goal to shoot for in desired conditions. So let's go to the next slide here. So this, I know it's difficult to see in this format on the webinar. This is a map of the park. For those of you familiar with it, will recognize it immediately. What we've done with this map is we've split the park up into 3 proposed visitor use management zones. So each one of these zones will have associated desired conditions. So in these zones, you would expect, as a visitor, a different kind of experience in each one of these zones. You'd also expect a kind of different conditions of resources or facilities or services that you might find. Let's go through our proposed zones here. So zone one on the map is the green zone. Obviously, it's the largest zone of the map, and it's all in 100%. It's in designated wilderness. So Zone 1 is an area where you're going to find low trail traffic and encounter rates. So an encounter rate, that is the number of people that you expect to see while you're on a trail, how many people you'll pass, how many people you'll encounter while you're in this area, this part of the park. And this is an area that's further out, it's more pristine. Like the bullet says there, you're going to have more natural landscapes. You're going to have a higher, you're going to be more in touch with those wilderness characteristics that we mentioned earlier. Let's go to the next slide. This zone also provides an outstanding opportunity to meet some of those wilderness characteristics, especially the ones for solitude and self-reliance. In this zone, you're going to find the ecological systems of the natural environment. They're going to be, free to do stuff, to work naturally. There's going to be less modern interventions. There's going to be less management from park staff in this zone. Also, Zone 1, you're going to find minimally maintained designated trails and then also cross-country routes as well. So let's go to Zone 2. So Zone 2 is all the yellow that you find on the map here. Zone 2 is also in 100% wilderness as well. But Zone 2, the main difference that you see there, Zone 2 is where the multitude of our trail system is and our destination options, or our destinations that most people go to. These recreational opportunities, they're closer to park facilities, so they're not as far back in. In this zone, you're going to expect to find kind of a moderate level of trail traffic with a moderate level of encounter rates on the trails. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. Nope, back one. Here we are. So yeah, in this area, the natural landscapes and resources will be moderately managed to ensure that park visitors are safe, and we optimize the resource protection in this zone as well. Also in this zone, you're more likely to encounter park staff on the trails. Your expectation for response to emergency is most likely quicker. And like I mentioned earlier, most of the park's, formal trail corridors and trail infrastructure is in the yellow here in Zone 2. So let's go to Zone 3. So Zone 3. So Zone 3 is actually all the orange that you see on the map, and Zone 3 is actually the 5% of the park that is not designated wilderness. The best way to describe Zone 3 is it's the built environment of the park. It's where you find the parking lots, the visitor centers, the campgrounds, the front country campgrounds, that is. It's where you find, the accessible trails in the park, the most maintained trails in the park. The one thing to note there, you'll see a big kind of blob of orange on the right-hand side of the map close to Estes Park. That's the Deer Mountain area. That area is the part of Zone 3 that is probably the least built out. The rest of Zone 3, you can see there pretty much centers around campgrounds and roadways. Let's go to the next slide. So, of course, in Zone 3, you find Trail Ridge Road. Trail Ridge Road is one of the iconic parts of the park and offers visitors, a great opportunity to view and interact with the alpine tundra. But it's from the established infrastructure of the road and designated overlooks as well. This zone is all about easy access with a variety of things that visitors can do easily. Scenic drives, wildlife viewing, attend interpretive programs, lots of scenic vistas, and of course the visitor center and campgrounds, like I mentioned. In this zone, this is where the most connection with park staff happens, and it's the opportunity for staff to interact with visitors and develop stewardship for the park over the long run. So let's go to the next slide. So moving away from the different zones, now we're going to talk about kind of those conceptual long-range management strategies that we are taking a look at. And again, this is where I'm going to insert a reminder for everybody, is this is another element where we want your comments. You know, what do you think is an appropriate strategy moving forward to deal with some of these issues? I do want to caveat there is, as we go through these issues, you're not going to see one that, you know, is the silver bullet that's going to, you know, solve all the problems in one foul swoop. You know, I'm imagining moving forward that we're going to need a suite of these, and, you know, these solutions and these strategies to be implemented. Some of them may be in a specific area of the park. Some of them may be park-wide. Some of them may be for part of the year in the park as well. So as we move through these, kind of keep that in mind, that, you know, we're not looking for one single answer here, but we're maybe looking for, you know, 2 or 3 or a suite of these solutions to be implemented to address these issues. Before we dive into, you know, kind of what the future holds possibly, we want to talk about things that we do or, you know, have been doing. And Darla mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation. Since 2006, we've piloted a variety of management strategies to address visitation. Certainly, probably, you know, well known to visitors is the vehicle restrictions that we do, not only along Bear Lake Road corridor, but certainly they happen in the Wild Basin area as well. And we also actively manage the Alpine Visitor Center parking lot. And again, you know, this visitation pattern that we've seen over the past several years of the big crunch between 10 and 3, this is when most of those temporary restrictions kick in and then, you know, end by 2 or 3 in the afternoon. We've done a lot of parking lot infrastructure improvements over the past several years. Some of them you may have noticed, some of them you may not have. You know, examples of this is that we reconfigured the Glacier Gorge parking area to make that work a little more efficiently and certainly facilitate the shuttle bus moving through there as well. We've done a lot of delineation of illegal roadside parking areas that have cropped up, allowing vegetation to return in those areas. The shuttle system, you know, certainly the park has had a shuttle system since the late 70s. Kind of our modern era system started in 2000 with the shuttle system that we have today. Over the years, we've made many tweaks to that to, you know, try to get the most out of it and try to address some of these periods of higher visitation. One of the other things we started in 2006 was a connection to the town of Estes Park to connect with their shuttle system and give the opportunity for folks staying in town to leave their vehicle behind and enter the park that way. And then certainly, you know, as mentioned previously as well, we had the timed entry system of last year and the timed entry system of this year that will be kicking off on Friday as well. So let's move to the next slide. So talking about future strategies, we'll just start off with, you know, advanced reservations or timed entry. You know, we've piloted it in 2020, and again, we'll be doing it here in 2021. This type of system can be, you know, applied to vehicles, could be applied to parking spaces, could be applied to shuttle access. And again, we're looking here not for a single solution, but a whole kind of suite of solutions as well. The biggest benefit to these types of systems is spreading that use throughout the day. You know, like I said, one of our big issues is that crunch between 10 and 2. A timed entry system spreads that use more evenly throughout the day, actually allows us to use our infrastructure, our existing infrastructure that we have, more efficiently, and, you know, improves the visitor experience overall by allowing, you know, to have a little more movement of traffic and visitors throughout the day rather than these periods of heavy use. And like I said, you know, this strategy, like most of these, could be applied to the entire park or just key areas of the park as well. So let's move to the next slide. There's a whole host of, parking related strategies that we could implement. Certainly managed access or managed entry systems or metering for specific lots. This could be in the form of an automated gate where you scan to get in. This could be in the form of, waiting for one in when one vehicle comes out. A lot of technology out there that's available. There's webcams that can monitor parking. There's also spot monitoring of parking lots. What that is, you may have seen this if you go to any of the parking structures along the Front Range. Tells you how many spots are available on each level. What there's a sensor in each parking space, and it tells you if there's a vehicle in there or if it's open, and that's how they calculate that. Again, all that could be tied into some advanced or real-time messaging on parking lot status, perhaps as you enter the park, or perhaps as you're entering Estes Park or Grand Lake. You could get information about availability of parking and, help visitors kind of plan their visit based on availability of parking as well. Let's go to the next slide. There's a lot of transportation related strategies that we can employ as well. These are kind of all under the, suite of intelligent transportation systems. You've already seen us doing this the past several years if you've been to the park, and certainly along the state's highway system, you see a lot of these. The use of variable message signs that can be updated to provide information to visitors on areas that are, congested, that there's not space available, look for alternatives, a variety of messaging that can be done. Again, automated gates to regulate the flow of vehicles. A prime example of if we put an automated gate on the Old Fall River Road, what that would do is allow a certain number of vehicles in at a certain time, and you'd get vehicles more evenly spaced rather than, surges of vehicles along that roadway at specific times. That could be applied to parking lots as well. And again, a lot of, tech type solutions with webcams and electronic monitoring of not only parking lots, but, you could calculate wait times like you see, as you on some of the interstate systems, you see, that it's 10 minutes to I-70 when you're heading south on I-25, things like that. We could set those up at the entrance stations or in Bear Lake Road corridor. So a variety of applications there. Let's go to the next slide. Again, we could employ area-specific strategies. We could implement hiking permits for certain popular trails. This has been done at a number of other areas, not only in the Park Service, but, Forest Service areas as well. You could, implement a day hike permit for Long's Peak, for example, or any of the other popular hikes within the park. We could also use area-specific temporary or seasonal closures for protection of resources. We do some of this now on a limited basis. There's some cliffs that are closed in the springtime for raptor nesting. This could be applied for other areas of the park with sensitive resources as well. And so let's go, and it's over to Doug now. Thanks.
Great, thanks, John. So now to a little bit more of the process and what we think is next in this planning process. Just a reminder that what you're seeing now is this is what we hope to achieve in these timelines, and there's kind of target timeframes and not expected dates at this point. But right now we're in obviously the civic engagement part of the planning process. And then, we're going to get comments from the public through July 19th and be reviewing them this summer. And we'll provide a summary of those comments by the fall. It's likely that the park will need to do additional research and data collection, hopefully next spring and summer. And then coming back to the public comments and the data that's been collected, refine and develop strategies and a proposed action for how to manage day use over the long term at the park, and not just a short term quick fix solution. Hope to start the NEPA process, which includes public scoping at the beginning in 2023 and drafting the long-term visitor use management plan for the park. So quickly, I did flash NEPA up there on the previous slide. It's the National Environmental Policy Act. I'm sure many of you are aware of it. And really what I'm trying to get at this slide is that it's the typical federal decision-making process, but it requires a heavy dose of public involvement in alternatives development and interdisciplinary approaches to the solution. And so really it's a way for the Park Service to make good decisions, sharing what the impacts might be and making sure that the public is informed throughout the process. And so just another reminder, this is very similar to what I showed earlier. Right now we have a public comment period that's open on the park's Pepsi site. And I will chat that out right now in the box. You should see that link. That's where you're going to use that website to let us know, to comment on this planning process. And there's a series of questions on that website which should help you develop a comment that will be most useful. And your thoughts on any of the key issues that we've identified, the desired conditions, and even most importantly, the management strategies and what you think is helpful or not helpful for managing visitation at the park. And so the website's there, it's in the chat, and just another reminder that public comments, that period closes on July 19th of this year. And so as we come to the end of the formal presentation, we're going to go into the question and answer period. I see many people have been submitting questions throughout this webinar, which is fantastic. Please continue to do so, and we will, we have about 45 minutes left here to answer any questions that come in. So please submit them, and I will turn it over to Kyle Patterson at the park to start the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Doug, and thanks again to everyone who has hung in and listened to this presentation, us providing information and of your just interest in being here and being engaged and involved and hanging with us through this whole presentation. So thanks so much for that. And as Doug mentioned, if you put in comments rather than questions, we just continue to encourage you to go to the Pepsi site and place those comments. But we will be now going through some of the questions. The first one that we would like to address is just a real quick one on this year's timed entry permit system. And then as Darla mentioned, we will be focusing all the rest of our questions and answers on the long-range visitor use management planning, because we know that that's when most of you have joined us and are interested in. So we have been asked the question, if I'm a local resident, or a senior citizen, I would like to go into the park at any time without a reservation. Why can't locals get special privilege or special access to Rocky Mountain National Park? And we just want to share that Rocky Mountain National Park is a national park. And so although many of us who are so fortunate to live on its doorstep or moved here because of that, we cannot provide special access to locals. And we understand and hope that people understand that then it would be very difficult if we could provide access to locals, especially what would define a local. Would that be just an Estes Park or Grand Lake resident? Would that be a Longmont, Loveland, Granby resident? Would that be a Fort Collins local, Colorado resident? So it's just very hard to define that, even if we were able to give special access to locals. So just wanted to share that. And then one other point is we really hope with this year's timed entry permit system that prior to 9 and after 3, when you don't need a reservation for the rest of the park, that allows some flexibility for those of us that are fortunate to live right on its doorstep. So just wanted to answer that question right away. And then if folks do have additional questions on this year's timed entry permit system, again, which is a very separate stopgap measure that Darla referenced, we encourage you to go onto the park's website And Doug will be putting that information in the chat box with frequently asked questions as well. So thank you again for these questions, and I'm going to go over to the questions right now here. Is the goal to ultimately reduce the number of visitors per year, or is the goal to devise ways to deal with increasing numbers of visitors? So the goal is to identify management strategies that will help protect resources, offer varied opportunities for high quality visitor experiences, enhance visitor and staff safety, and coincide with the park's operational capacity. So visitor use to the park will continue to be dynamic. So the plan is really intended to help park staff strategize and prioritize efforts over the long term in coordination with partners to more effectively accommodate use. And as Darla mentioned, the other very important aspect of our mission is to ensure the sustainability of resources and operations for future generations to come. So thank you for that question. And John and Darla, I'll just ask if you have anything else to add to that point as well.
Yeah, I would just add too that, again, you know, we've been trying some different things over the last 6 years, how to manage this increase in visitation. And so those are all part of us trying to figure out what is that proper balance. And as you all know, last year with the timed entry, we were looking at about 65% of our maximum parking capacity. This year, we're bumping that up a bit. But oftentimes, it's not so much the numbers of people, but, you know, uncontrolled people come within this very short range of time between about 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. And so this timed entry system, the best part of what we're doing now to experiment with, you know, what's our best long range alternatives, is that it spreads the use out throughout the day. And so, you know, in the end, we don't know what that exact number is going to be. I think that's why we're trying these different things to see, you know, are we able to actually accommodate visitation by spreading it out?
Thank you, Darla. And we did have a tongue-in-cheek question, I believe, that kind of addressed that, as far as, do you not think that last year people could have impacts from COVID after 5 p.m. and is that why you stopped your reservation system then? And so Darla just emphasized the reason we are doing this is to spread that use throughout the day and spread the impacts out throughout the day as well. Next question is, why only address day use? You should look at all users. So one of the things that we have been addressing at Rocky Mountain National Park since the 1970s is that overnight use, particularly with wilderness permit system, as well as our 5 front country campgrounds. So John, do you want to mention a little bit about why our focus is mainly on day use versus overnight use?
Yeah. You know, like you mentioned, Kyle, you know, our overnight use is pretty well managed already through our backcountry plan with the wilderness campsites, as well with our designated front country campgrounds. But over and above that, what we're seeing in the visitation to the park is we see the percentage of people that come just for the day or come, you know, for one day is extremely high. One of the great examples of that is Rocky Mountain is the only national park in the system that has a day pass. And what we see in sales from that, it's about 75% to 80% of visitors purchase the day pass and versus the weekly or a long-term pass, and they come for the day. The other thing that feeds into that as well is the makeup of our visitors to the park. Even though it is a, you know, designated national park, you know, 35 to 40% of our visitors, based on our last visitor survey that which was 2010, come from Colorado and the Front Range of Colorado. Beyond that, it's visitors from Nebraska and Kansas and Texas. So it's a very regional visitation. So we get a lot of folks coming to the park just for that day. or just for, you know, a period of the day as well. So yeah, you know, like I mentioned too during the presentation, you know, we have that huge concentration of youth between 10 and 3. We've had some pretty good traffic data from 2008, 2013, 17, and 2020, and then we're going to do it again this year. Shows that traffic pattern of everybody coming in the morning and leaving in the afternoon. There's actually a huge spike of people that leave the park between 3:30 and 5 during a typical visitation year. And so that's people heading back to their lodging or back to their home on the Front Range as well. So yeah, it's very heavily day use, and we have some supporting research on that as well.
Great, thank you, John. John, you're up for the next question as well.
I'll leave my camera on then.
How were the desired conditions zone boundaries created?
Yeah, that so I'll be upfront with you here. That was a very challenging for the park staff that did work on that, and that we would love your feedback on if those zones are appropriate. You know, basically, Zone 3 is pretty easy to define. It's not in wilderness. It's the built environment. It's visitor centers and parking lots and shuttle stops and campgrounds. That's pretty straightforward. It's the difference between Zone 1 and Zone 2. And I think the biggest takeaway that we had from the park's perspective is Zone 2 is where the bulk of the trail system is. And it's kind of the bulk of the trail use that we see. One thing that we were able to do in 2019 and again in 2020 is we had some trail counters at the Glacier Gorge to Loch Vale area, and we saw significant drop off in trail use beyond the Loch Vale area. So initially, you know, up to Alberta Falls there, lots of use on the trail, and then even, you know, as far out as like Loch Vale, but then after that, significant drop off. And that's kind of where we saw that boundary of Zone 2. So there's a little bit of, you know, we tried to look into that and, you know, is there really a break there between Zone 2 and Zone 1? And in that area, based on the trail counts, we're able to see that. So that's our assumption that plays out in the rest of that difference between Zone 2 and Zone 1. Zone 1 being, again, you know, the more rugged, pristine, less people going into that part of the wilderness.
Thank you, John. Next question. Is Rocky's intent to manage vehicles or people? The plan will look at all aspects of managing visitor use. So we're looking at all varied forms of access and the associated visitor use activities, behaviors, levels, and patterns. And so it's important to note that Rocky Mountain National Park, and John certainly referenced this in his comments, we are a national park that has used shuttles in some form since the 1970s in the Bear Lake Road corridor. The shuttle system has improved greatly since the early 2000s with the type of buses and equipments, the greener fleet, the more frequent stops. But we also know that shuttles can be part of the solution, and they can also be part of the problem, because oftentimes the carrying capacity of trails are relying on the existing parking lots. And so then when you bring more people in from shuttle buses, and you have surges of people that are getting off the shuttle buses, you also have to think through what that experience is for visitors. Can the toilet facilities take it when you're having the surging of visitors that are getting off the buses? And are you elevating the capacity of the area because you're bringing shuttle buses in? So it's a tool that we've been using since the 70s, and we will absolutely continue to use it as a tool as we move forward. It's been a challenge to use that as a tool the last 2 years because of COVID and capacity, but certainly that will always be a tool that we can incorporate into our long range planning. John, do you have anything else you want to elaborate on with shuttles?
Yeah, on the shuttles there, you know, on the other side, I mean, you mentioned a lot of the good reasons there, Kyle. The other side of the picture too is certainly expense. You know, to offer shuttles is, you know, can be pricey, and that you have to be strategic with the routes that you pick, where you get the most use. You know, that's another aspect to consider. And then I just did want to make a comment on kind of on the spirit of the whole question. You know, from the planning perspective, it's certainly easy to manage and, you know, manage vehicles and transportation and transit in there. Where you have to take into account is the resource when you get out to the trails and the impact on the resource. So that's kind of, you have to kind of marry up those two concerns in your overall plan. So we're not just looking at a transportation plan, we're also looking at a visitor use plan because of the impacts to the park resources as well. So just wanted to throw that into the mix as well.
Great, thank you, John. And another question that's tied to shuttle buses is, you know, are you considering only using shuttle buses in places like the Bear Lake Road corridor, and or expanding the shuttle service into other areas of the park? Would that be a tool? And, you know, we'd love to continue to have people's thoughts on that. If you have additional thoughts on the shuttle system, we would love for you to provide those comments in our Pepsi site to think of other solutions or suggestions of how we might use those. You know, again, we have to think through the costs, as John mentioned, as well as just the infrastructure that would be needed to go to different locations if we use the shuttles. And right now, Bear Lake Road, you know, we've done a lot for the Bear Lake Road to also provide vehicle access. So John, do you want to mention a little bit about just the infrastructure that's already in place in Bear Lake and why we would continue to maybe want there to be a mix of some sort?
Yeah, Bear Lake, you know, it's been designed to be set up to provide vehicle access as well as shuttle access. And in fact, there's as many parking spots in the Bear Lake Road corridor as there is in the rest of the park, actually slightly more in the Bear Lake Road corridor. So if we were to not utilize that parking infrastructure and then, you know, go to shuttles only, that would be difficult because, you know, we'd still be wanting to accommodate that level of visitors, but where are they going to park? So yeah, it's a delicate balance in the Bear Lake Road corridor because, you know, significant design and investment has gone into providing both vehicle and transit access in that area. So to kind of walk away from one or the other at this point would be, we'd have to have some pretty compelling reasons for that as well. But yeah, certainly, you know, open to the comments from folks and ideas that folks might have. Another thing that I will mention about shuttles and shuttle service to the other parts of the park is, you know, what we found in the park is there seems to be like a magical cutoff at the 20-minute mark. If your shuttle wait is longer than, or your shuttle ride and wait is longer than 20 minutes, we see a significant drop off in use. So, you know, there's been over the years a lot of comments about providing a shuttle to the west side of the park. And again, you know, that would be an extremely long shuttle ride. It's a long ride in a car, but on a transit vehicle, it's going to be a little longer. And I'm not sure of people's desire for that. And then that coupled with the cost as well, you know, it makes some of those solutions challenging. Where we found shuttles to be most effective is in short, more frequent service as well.
Thanks, John. Next question that I'll pass along to Darla is, how does staffing levels compare with increased usage? I think we'd love to say that our staffing has increased at the same rate that our visitation has, but it has not. So Darla, passing that on to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. So Our base budget that we get from Congress each year has seen a very flat situation for the last, say, 10 years or so. And as a matter of fact, because of that flat, it's essentially an erosion of our budget. So we've seen about a 14% decrease in our base budget in the last 10 years. And staffing wise, we've seen about a 16% reduction, while at the same time, we've seen that 44% increase in visitation. So that is correct. The base funding and the staffing levels are not commensurate with the increase in visitation. We are, working on that and trying to get some additional funding, recognizing that the Park Service has been providing a little bit more funding here and there to parks that have increased visitation. So that's something that we're very keen on, and so stay tuned. We have not seen that as of yet.
Thank you, Darla. So another question also tied to this, if since this is a budget, might be helpful to continue to talk about this, is have we seen an increase in our maintenance budget commensurate with our level of visitation, and how does that work, and what about deferred maintenance tied to that as well?
All right, great question. So the park's deferred maintenance right now, and that means, all manner of maintenance that we need to do on the 500 structures in the park. It includes buildings, that includes trails, any manner of assets. We are at about $105 million in deficit. So that's $105 million in deferred maintenance. There was an act passed last year called the Great America Outdoors Act that takes money from oil and gas royalties and provides to public land management agencies such as the Park Service to start addressing some of that deferred maintenance. It is a competitive process, and we are very engaged in competing along with all of our brother and sister park units to try to capture some of that funding. Now, for the Great America Outdoor funding, it does go primarily to the larger projects. So, for example, maintenance, repair, restoration of a sewer and water line or a campground or those sorts of things. This is only a 5-year set of funding, so we're going to take advantage of it to the degree that we can. We certainly have plenty of projects, but again, it is a competitive process. So stay tuned for more on that. It is, we are seeing more funding again for those bigger projects. But sometimes the things get a little more left behind are the cyclic maintenance, the day-to-day, the painting, the upkeep of the facilities and trails and things like that.
Thank you. Along those same lines, would a strategy be to use more volunteers, Darla? What's our existing volunteer program, and could we incorporate more volunteers to assist the park, since so many people so much want to help and consider this their beloved place?
Yes, our volunteers are absolutely critical to this park. We could not run this park without them. So thanks for whomever asked that question. We employed, I think, like 500 volunteers even last year during COVID. So we have a very robust, one of the biggest volunteer programs in the National Park Service. But as you might suspect, there's a limit to our capacity to be able to manage that. You've got to find the appropriate supervisors to manage that, to help direct people, to ensure they've got the appropriate PPE and the training, that they're able to work safely, that they know what their assignment is. And so while we absolutely take full advantage of the volunteer opportunities, it's not completely endless. We do have to be very strategic in how we decide what is going to be a volunteer activity and how many people can we accommodate.
Okay, thank you. The next question, Carrie, I would love to be able to get your input and thoughts on. And this question is, have any common best practices for common problems emerged from other national parks? This is not just a Rocky Mountain National Park issue. So we would appreciate hearing from you, because you do have a pulse into how other parks are addressing this and how we're all working together.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's so true. So many other parks are experiencing some of these same needs and issues and dynamic changes in visitor use across the entire system. In fact, our other partner agencies have had some similar experiences. In fact, other countries. So we've actually been having quite a lot of dialogue across the service with those other agencies and even in that international context to really understand and share experiences, share things that are working, maybe things we've tried that haven't worked as well as anticipated. So really working hard right now for sure to gather up all of those lessons learned and to disseminate those as widely as possible and to use them in the ongoing planning and decision-making efforts underway. Of course, what's needed at any particular park is going to be specific to that park. So what we might need to do for Rocky Mountain might look a little different than other things that might be successful at other park units. We definitely want to make sure we're always thinking about the specific resources and visitor experiences and what's going to work best for each individual unit. But of course, there are a lot of important shared lessons learned that are really, especially right now, important to actively share across the agency.
Thank you, Carrie. Some other questions on just general research and data. So John, maybe you and I can address these as well. The question is curiosity if there's any research citations regarding decreasing air quality due to vehicles. So as many of us would think through, as far as the National Park Service really strives to improve the air quality of its park units, and places like Rocky Mountain National Park is, certainly a canary in the coal mine as far as the regional nature of air quality, creating additional challenges to Rocky Mountain National Park. So many of you may be aware that there's been over 35 years of data gathering in Lockvale that shows that we've had significant increases in nitrogen deposition in Rocky Mountain National Park. So just the way that our weather occurs, upslopes bring it up, it hits the Continental Divide and then rains down basically in the Lockvale drainage. And of course, if that's happening in Lockvale, you would assume that it's happening in other areas as well. So we participate in a regional air quality working group to help protect the park. It's certainly a regional issue. And when we're looking at where the sources are for some of the nitrogen deposition and air quality issues, it's from a variety of sources, but the main source is not coming from within the park or park vehicles. As you can imagine, just the number of just emissions and agriculture and other sources are mainly coming from different sources. So we do have long range data and research on air quality issues in Rocky. John, I don't believe we have the answer to this question, but how intense was the trail widening from this past year due to social distancing and COVID? Because our visitation was down last year and we were managing for that, about 73% overall previous years, I don't believe we have any data at this point to support that was the case. John, do you know of any?
No, I don't, and we didn't do, most of our mapping of the visitor created trails was prior to 2020. And already existing too. I think with the lower overall visitation that we did have for the park, probably it didn't. It was probably stable, but like you said, we don't have any direct data on that. With some of the limited use that we saw in other areas of the park last year outside of Bear Lake, I mean, perhaps there was even some regain of the natural vegetation in some areas, but yeah, we don't have any specific data related to COVID related stuff. I'm trying to think, I believe there was some other parks that were looking at COVID related visitation more closely than we did last year, and I don't know, but we don't have anything specifically for Rocky on that.
Hey, Kyle, are you there?
Well, it sounds like we may have lost her.
No, I'm here. Sorry, I was blocked from unmuting myself. So whoever let me back in, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to group the next subject matter of questions. They're about enforcement and education. So I'm just going to read directly. I believe that enforcement of park rules will help drive correct behaviors. What plans are in place to increase these actions? What can be done to better educate visitors before entering the park about illegal campfires and not veering off of park designated trails? Can we have visitor training that sets expectations prior to park entry? Other high visitation park areas have this in place. Have you thought about better ways to educate visitors, more signs, sign declarations that they understand various issues? And just again, a line of questions that it seems like many of the key issues have less to do with numbers of visitors and more to do with behavior. And so all of these are really important points that we continue to try to tackle at Rocky Mountain National Park. And again, is another venue and area, because we know we can always improve, and we would love your thoughts if you want to go into Pepsi and give us some of your thoughts on that. So one of the things that we are certainly seeing in Rocky and public lands around us, as Darla mentioned, we're continuing to work very closely with public lands, both federal, county, and local, is we're all experiencing very similar things. So when you see an increase in visitors, like let's just Rocky Mountain National Park, 44% increase, the same percentage of society probably doesn't follow the rules, is not interested in the rules. And so if it's the same percentage, when you have more people, you just see it more. And so with that group of people that don't know how to behave, some of those people don't know, and some of those people don't care. And so the don't know group is really what we are excited to connect with and reach out to. They want to, they want to protect the resources, they want to have less impacts. So those are the people that might just be coming to a national park and really want to do the right thing. What we find in areas like illegal campfires is those are usually visitors that don't care. And so oftentimes illegal campfires are connected with illegal camping on top of dogs running off leash. And so it's usually a gathering of behavior where they're very clear that they know that it's an illegal campfire, and that's okay. They don't care. Our colleagues in the Forest Service are dealing with that significantly, as John mentioned, from last year's significant increase. Many of them were reporting 200% increase. So they were really seeing human waste issues, trash left behind, campfires, just again, behavior from people that didn't care. So that continues to be the struggle, is how we connect and reach those people. But we continue to be excited about those visitors who are coming to public lands and want to do the right thing. And so we have started things like a Rocky Pledge to continue to say, this is how you help your friends behave well when visiting in Rocky Mountain National Park. Darla mentioned some of our challenges with staffing and enforcement. So Darla, I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add about just how we continue to work toward making sure that we're also being able to educate and enforce when needed.
Yeah, as you're saying, Kyle, I mean, it's a multifaceted issue, right? It's it's enforcement, but it's also education. It's, you know, advanced planning versus those who do no advanced planning. So it's really complicated, and we do our best to try to reach people for the advanced planning through, you know, our social media, our website, try to help people understand what they're coming to, but acknowledging that there are those folks that don't plan ahead at all. They come up on a Saturday at 11 o'clock in the morning and think they're going to get in, and that hasn't been possible in the summertime for a number of years. And so it's a suite of things that we need to do, and we're trying to grapple with that proper balance for sure. We're throwing everything we can at it. We recognize that this is the park's #1 issue. So if you've got ideas or suggestions about other things that we can do, definitely get into that Pepsi system and send us some of your comments or ideas for that, because you know, we frequently, as a national park system, communicate with our peers in the national park that are facing the exact same things. And so we are not doing this alone, as Carrie and John and Kyle have all said, that you know, we're comparing notes and saying what works for y'all, what's your different situation there. And so it's a continuous learning process. But if you've got some other thoughts and ideas about how we might improve that, please let us know.
Thank you. So now jumping to some other questions, John, that I'll send to you, and we've got about 8 to 10 minutes left. So John, one of the questions is, can the park access points be segmented to control entry? So can quick access points be installed? And then along those same lines, so that is the first part of one question. And then the next question, kind of related, are what are the budgetary constraints or possibilities for some of the high-tech parking and usage solutions?
Yeah, I think I'm going to tackle that second one first, because I think it might be a little bit of a shorter answer. And yeah, certainly there's budgetary concerns with you know, the use of those technologies. The other concerns with that is we're in the national park there, and you know, our connectivity is in a lot of places non-existent. So some of those systems would require a certain amount of infrastructure to be put in, and that is not only challenging budgetary wise, but then we do need to be cognizant of where we put those in the park and how they would be deployed in the park. You know, would we look at the use of towers? Would we look at the, you know, use of fiber cable being, you know, laid throughout the park? So a lot to kind of go into those, not only on the budget side, but kind of on, you know, is it appropriate in the park? And where is it appropriate in the park? And what is the best way to deploy those in the park as well? So yeah, you know, these solutions, you know, they have a lot of implications too. The other thing to keep in mind with those types of solutions too is you kind of almost need a central clearinghouse and a traffic management center. You know, CDOT and the state level has an entire operation, you know, in Golden that controls, you know, messaging and camera monitoring statewide, and you know, they're running 24/7 to do that. Granted, that's on the, you know, on the state level, but you know, we'd almost need a similar mini version of that as well. So a lot to consider in deploying those technologies, and then you have to balance all that cost and implications against the benefit as well. So on the previous question, give me a little refresher on that one, Kyle. I want to get the details right.
Yes, John, hold on one moment.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Can the park access points be segmented to control entry? Can quick access points be installed?
Yeah, I mean, I think there can, in some areas, there can be some of that is, you know, enhanced and done. Again, we're facing the same challenges there, budgetary, infrastructure-wise, and then moreover, you know, do you set up an entrance that takes you directly to Bear Lake? Well, then that's got a lot of implications, to, are you going to build new infrastructure? Where is it going to be? Is it going to go through, existing resources or existing wilderness? So a lot to be taken into consideration there. I think and we're constantly looking at improvements in, our current entry points and stuff. I mean, there's prepaid type things you could do, automated gates, which we certainly have at 2 of the park entrance stations. So I think there's things that we can do. Some of it to kind of, give you like a direct route to Bear Lake or the Bear Lake Road corridor. Those would be a little more challenging, I think, to implement.
Okay, thanks, John. In the interest of time, I'm going to move quickly through these last couple of ones. Question is around demand pricing and the economics and aspect of. So what consideration are you giving to increasing fees? Someone might say that if something's overused, one needs to increase costs, just thorough rationing or just suffer overuse. Wonder if you discounted entry on off hours, is that would change the patterns? And is there a talk of increasing park costs to increase budget for operation and maintenance? So I think just to address that just, real quickly is we often hear from others in the private sector, why don't you just implement demand pricing? So in July, increase your price. On weekends, increase your price. But one of the things that we need to look at very strongly in the National Park Service is the socioeconomic aspects of that. So whereas a private company might be able to implement that, the National Park Service would not implement that because it would penalize people that only could come in July because of school schedules or only able to come on weekends. So that's something that we would certainly have a different take on than a private industry, like a ski area or an amusement park. So another aspect of that is we do keep 80% of our fees that come into Rocky Mountain National Park. And Darla, maybe if you could just briefly talk about where those fees go that stay within the park. Darla, we need you to unmute. See, I'm not the only one this happened to. Okay, we'll give a second and see if Darla is unmuted. No, shaking her head. So, okay, I'm going to keep answering that question then. So just real quickly, and Doug, let me know, or Darla, if you come on, if you get your microphone. We keep 80% of the fees that come in through our entrance station. And then we from that 80%, this is when I need a flow chart. So from that 80%, we pay off our shuttle bus system, which, John, is roughly $2.5 million a year. So that comes right off of the top. And then we also are bound to use 55% of what's remaining toward our deferred maintenance, as Darla had mentioned before, which we are now at $105 million for. So once all of this starts to, be siphoned off into these other areas, we have roughly about $2 million left to go toward other programs and visitor-related enhancements and services. So just to answer that question as to where that money currently goes. Okay, I think the mic issues for Darla are not quite there. So let me go to the next question. Doug, can you let me know whether Darla's mic is up and running?
It seems like it could be something at her local station and not anything with the program itself.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much. Okay, so going back to the questions as we wrap up here, thank you so much for everybody sticking with us here toward the end, is the question about would you consider specific questions on zones. So this might just be a great opportunity for people to encourage, and we encourage you to explore and unpack this through Pepsi. So could there be more access points into Zone 3? I love going there, but it's harder to access and parking still gets crazy. Have you considered adding more trails and trailheads to disperse visitors to other areas of the park? Any chance more trails could be developed in zones 2 and 3? And along those same lines, is the 95% designated area as managed as wilderness in Rocky Mountain National Park to remain firm? So the same kind of aspect. Is there any talk of increasing zone 2 and 3 areas to maybe spread people out? Is there talk of reducing travel trailers, buses, and RVs to certain park areas? So again, those would be all great. In the interest of time, we'll jump in and answer those, but those would be also just great things to put into the Pepsi site with your either questions or comments about those aspects. So John, I'll turn that over to you as far as just, kind of, could there be more access points into Zone 3? And what does it mean that the park is managed 95% as designated wilderness?
Yeah, well, the park is it was proposed as wilderness in the 60s, and then is it 2009?
Yes, designated wilderness in 2009.
Yeah, I was drawing a blank there, so thanks for the backup. Yeah, it was designated wilderness by Congress, and that. So at this time, at the park level, we're not proposing that designation change, and nobody else is proposing that as well. Again, to make an adjustment to that has to go through Congress and be congressionally approved. So at this point, that doesn't seem like it's on the horizon, and I think we'd have to have a pretty compelling reason to do that. More than anything, I think if there was, something we'd be doing like a swap. We'd be undesignating a small portion and redesignating another portion, maybe to accommodate some kind of infrastructure improvement. But again, that would all have to pass through Congress, and there's a lot of interest in maintaining designated wilderness. I think that would be challenging for sure. On some of the other aspects that have been mentioned, I think we continue to look for ways to improve different areas of the park. There's been a lot of, looking into. There's actually been some research that was done in the park. Certainly, one that comes to mind was done in 2012 and 2013, looking at what would be an alternative for folks rather than going to the Bear Lake Road corridor, the Bear Lake corridor area. Research did not really yield very much interest in people wanting to go to a different area of the park. Bear Lake is very iconic for many visitors and offers a lot of attributes that visitors are seeking. So, developing other areas to spread out use is challenging. And, based on what we saw under the timed entry system of last year, Bear Lake remained very popular, even at that much reduced capacity that we were at. And we actually saw, underutilization of other areas of the park, where in previous year at the higher visitation numbers, we saw a lot of use in those areas. And I think that gets back to that point of people can't get to their primary destinations. So, I think before we move forward with enhancing a different area of the park, I think we would really have to be confident there'd be some level of interest for that as well. Because, based on the research and the information we have, it just doesn't seem like that's of a lot of interest to a lot of folks at this point.
Thank you, John. So take-home message with that is that Rocky Mountain National Park 95% is protected as designated wilderness. it's a huge draw of why people come to visit Rocky Mountain National Park, is to experience the wilderness and then have all of these different accessible areas as well on the boundary of the wilderness, as well as, their entry points to the wilderness as well. And also thinking through our current infrastructure and our deferred maintenance on our existing infrastructure. So as John mentioned, we have to think long and hard if we were going to be building new trailheads and infrastructure, where would be the destinations and what would that look like as far as being able to have that be sustainable for Rocky's future as far as maintaining that. In the interest of time, we may not have addressed everyone's questions, and apologize for that. We hope that if we did not, that you can also go into Pepsi and address those as well with questions and potential solutions. And we wanted to also share that we know that there were some questions specific to this year's timed entry program. And so, because again, in the interest of time, we wanted to really focus on this long-range visitor use management planning. But if you have specific questions on the timed entry system and when the reservations are for, please go to the link that we provided. And we're also sharing the romo_information at nps.gov email address, and we'll try to address and answer your questions on this year's timed entry permit system as well. So I'm going to pause and see if Darla's sound is working now.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Perfect timing, Darla. Back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, and apologize for that little glitch. But we're back on. So just wanted to thank everybody again so much for joining us today and taking the time to be with us. As you can see, this is a very complicated issue, and there's really no easy answers. I think one thing that we can all agree on is not only is this park an important Colorado resource, but it's a really important park for the American people and an international destination as well. So again, as managers, we must ensure that we are in fact managing the park. And our mission and our charge is to ensure that we're protecting our resources and simultaneously providing the opportunity for the public to have a great experience here. And so, again, this is just the beginning of this long-term planning. Please submit your ideas and suggestions on Pepsi. As Doug previously commented, we'll be preparing a report about that later this fall, and that will be made public. And then beyond that, we're going to continue to refine the zones and the desired conditions and potential management strategies. And eventually we will come out with some additional or some more refined management alternatives that the public will once again have an opportunity to comment on. So this is the very beginning of the process with several opportunities for you all to be engaged throughout the process. So thanks very much again for your attention today, for getting engaged, and for being respectful as part of your engagement here, and asking some great questions and giving us some great things to think about. So thank you very much for attending, and this concludes our public engagement session for today. And everyone, hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.